In June and July 2025, 7 men faced the ultimate consequence for their actions, their lives ending in the sterile confines of execution chambers across America. Their stories are not just about death, but about the lives they destroyed, the justice sought, and the questions that linger. Who were these men, and what drove them to commit acts so heinous that death was deemed their only reckoning? Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more gripping crime stories. Leave a comment below. Where are you watching from? What's running through your mind as this case unfolds? Your thoughts matter. First, we travel to Florida, where a grocery store parking lot became the stage for a nightmare. Anthony Wainwright, executed on June 10, 2025, at the age of 54, was a man whose name now evokes horror. But what did he do to end up on death row? His victim was Carmen Gayhart, a 23-year-old mother of 2, a nursing student whose bright future was stolen in an instant. Carmen was known for her kindness, always helping neighbors in Fort White with groceries or offering a smile to strangers. She had no connection to Wainwright before that fateful day in 1994, when he was 23, a stranger, whose path crossed hers with devastating consequences. Wainwright recently escaped from a minimum custody prison in North Carolina with his accomplice Richard Hamilton, was a man on the run, fueled by desperation and violence. Court records paint a picture of a drifter, unbound by morals, seeking easy targets to fuel their flight. On April 14, 1994, Carmen was loading groceries into her car at a Winn-Dixie in Lake City, Florida, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Wainwright and Hamilton had been watching, waiting for an opportunity. Why Carmen? Perhaps it was her vulnerability, alone in the parking lot, under the midday sun. The events unfolded with chilling speed. The 2 men approached, guns drawn, and forced her into the back seat of her own car. What followed was a descent into horror. The crime was brutal, a violation of humanity itself. Driven to a secluded road, Carmen was raped by both men, her pleas ignored. They attempted to strangle her, but when that failed, Wainwright, according to court documents, took a gun and shot her twice in the back of the head. Her body was left discarded on the roadside, a mother torn from her children, her dreams extinguished. The crime scene was haunting, bloodstains on the gravel, her belongings scattered, a testament to her desperate struggle. But the evidence told a different story, one that would lead to justice. The investigation was relentless. Within hours, police found Carmen's car abandoned in Mississippi, thanks to a tip from a vigilant citizen. DNA evidence from the back seat matched Wainwright and Hamilton, and shell casings found near Carmen's body, linked to a gun in their possession. The breakthrough came the next day, April 15. After a shootout with police in Mississippi, Wainwright and Hamilton were arrested, blood still on their clothes. Wainwright admitted to the kidnapping and rape but claimed Hamilton fired the fatal shots. But the jury didn't believe his story. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, ballistics, and witness accounts of the men fleeing the scene painted a clear picture of guilt. The trial in 1995 was swift but contentious. Prosecutors argued Wainwright's active role in the kidnapping, rape, and murder warranted death, emphasizing the cold-blooded nature of the execution-style killing. The defense pointed to a letter from Hamilton, who died on death row in 2023, claiming he was the shooter, but the jury dismissed it as unreliable. Wainwright was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Appeals spanned 3 decades, citing attorney misconduct and questionable DNA evidence, but all were denied. A final appeal in June 2025 failed to sway the U.S. Supreme Court, and no stays were granted. On June 10, 2025, at 6:00 p.m., the execution process began at Florida State Prison. Lethal injection was the chosen method, a 3-drug protocol, a sedative to render him unconscious, a paralytic to stop his breathing, and potassium chloride to halt his heart. Strapped to a gurney, Wainwright faced a small group of witnesses, including Carmen's family. His last meal, a shocking request, a cheeseburger and a milkshake, a simple choice that belied the gravity of his fate. In his final statement, he turned to the witnesses and said, "I'm sorry for the pain I caused. I hope you find peace." At 6:08 p.m., the drugs were administered. Witnesses noted his eyes fluttering shut, his chest stilling as the room fell silent. Anthony Wainwright was pronounced dead, a life ended for a life taken. But the story of justice in 2025 doesn't end in Florida. In Oklahoma, another man faced his reckoning. John Hanson, executed on June 20, 2025, at 61, carried the weight of a crime committed 26 years earlier. Who was his victim? Mary Agnes Bowles, a 77-year-old grandmother, whose love for gardening and bingo nights at her Tulsa church defined her quiet life. Mary had no personal connection to Hansen, a stranger whose path crossed hers in a moment of desperation. But what drove him to destroy her world? In August 1999, Hansen, then 35, and his accomplice Victor Miller were drowning in debt and drug addiction. They saw crime as their way out, targeting vulnerable victims for quick cash. On August 9, 1999, they spotted Mary leaving a Tulsa mall, her slow steps making her an easy mark. What happened next was a tragedy of greed and violence. Hansen and Miller forced Mary into the back of her own car at gunpoint, driving her to a remote dirt pit outside the city. The crime scene was stark. Mary was shot in the chest by Hansen, her body left slumped in the dirt, still clutching her purse. The pit's owner, Gerald Thurman, stumbled upon the scene and was killed by Miller, shot to silence his witness. Mary's death was not just a murder, it was the theft of a grandmother's legacy, leaving her family to mourn a senseless loss. The investigation moved with precision. Police found shell casings at the scene matching a gun later recovered from Hansen's apartment. Tire tracks linked to Miller's car provided another clue, and a mall security camera captured two men matching their descriptions near Mary's car. Miller's confession in prison was the turning point, admitting he killed Thurman, but pointing to Hansen as Mary's killer. Hansen denied it, claiming he was only a bystander, but the evidence was overwhelming. His fingerprints on Mary's purse and ballistics tying the gun to him led to his arrest on August 6, 1999, in a friend's basement, after a week on the run. The trial in 2000 was a clash of narrative. Prosecutors portrayed Hansen as the orchestrator, driven by greed, while the defense argued Miller's influence and Hansen's addiction mitigated his guilt. The jury convicted Hansen of first-degree murder, sentencing him to death. Appeals stretched over decades, with Hansen's team claiming Miller's confession exonerated him, but courts upheld the conviction. In 2025, Oklahoma's Pardon and Parole Board denied clemency, and no last-minute stays were granted.
On June 12, 2025, at 6 p.m., the execution process began at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. Lethal injection was used, following the same three-drug protocol as Florida. Hansen's last meal was humble, fried chicken and mashed potatoes, a nod to simpler times. In his final moments, he faced the witnesses, his voice steady. "I didn't kill her," he said. "I hope the truth comes out one day." At 6:15 p.m., the drugs took effect. Witnesses saw a slight shudder before his body went still, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. John Hansen was gone, but his claim of innocence left a shadow of doubt. In South Carolina, a state that hadn't seen a firing squad in over a decade, the execution of Stephen Stanko on June 13, 2025, sent shockwaves through the nation. At 57 years old, Stanko faced death for a crime that shattered the trust of a small community. But what did he do to end up on death row? His victim was Henry Turner, a 74-year-old retiree, known for his love of books and his quiet life in Conway, South Carolina. Henry was a widower, a man who welcomed friends into his home with coffee and stories of his days as a schoolteacher. Stanko, a charming but troubled man, had befriended Henry years earlier, often visiting to borrow books or share a meal. Their relationship was one of trust, until it turned deadly. By April 2006, Stanko, then 38, was spiraling. Court records reveal a man plagued by financial ruin and a history of violence. He had been living with his girlfriend Laura Ling and her teenage daughter, but his relationship with Laura was crumbling. After killing Laura and assaulting her daughter, Stanko fled to Henry's home, seeking refuge. Henry, unaware of Stanko's actions, let him in. What happened next was a betrayal of the worst kind. In Henry's living room, surrounded by shelves of books, Stanko turned on his friend. The crime scene was chilling. Henry was beaten to death with a baseball bat, his body left slumped in a chair, blood pooling on the floor. Stanko stole Henry's car and fled, leaving behind a trail of devastation. But the evidence told a different story, one that would bring him to justice. The investigation was swift. Police linked Stanko to Laura Ling's murder through DNA evidence, and the daughter's testimony, which also pointed them to Henry's home. Blood on Stanko's clothes matched Henry's, and the stolen car was found abandoned in Augusta, Georgia. A tip from a citizen who recognized Stenko from news reports led to his arrest on April 12, 2006, at a gas station. During questioning, Stenko claimed he acted in self-defense, but the jury didn't believe his story. The evidence was overwhelming. The bat, bearing Stenko's fingerprints, and the daughter's account of his violent spree, painted a clear picture of guilt. The trial in 2007 was a media storm. Prosecutors argued Stenko's calculated betrayal of Henry, coupled with Laura's murder, showed a pattern of remorseless violence. The defense claimed Stenko suffered from mental illness, citing a history of erratic behavior, but the jury rejected that. He was convicted of Henry's murder and sentenced to death. Appeals followed, with Stenko's team arguing his mental state warranted a lighter sentence, but all were denied. In May 2025, Stenko chose the firing squad over lethal injection, or the electric chair, a decision that sparked debate about the method's brutality. No last-minute stays were granted. On June 13, 2025, at 6 p.m., the execution process began at the Broad River Correctional Institute. The firing squad, a rare method not used in the U.S. since 2010, involved 5 trained marksmen, one with a blank round, aiming at a target over Stenko's heart. Strapped to a chair in a stark room, Stenko faced the rifles behind a bulletproof window. His last meal, a shocking request, pizza and a soda, a casual choice for such a grave moment. In his final statement, he said, "I made mistakes. I'm sorry for the hurt I caused." At 6:08 p.m., the team fired. Witnesses reported a loud crack, Stenko's body jerking slightly, before going limp. Autopsy reports later suggested the shots missed his heart, prolonging his pain for seconds longer than intended. Stephen Stenko was pronounced dead, a stark end to a life of violence. The story shifts to Florida, where another execution took place on June. Thomas Lee Godinez, aged 51, faced lethal injection for a crime that haunted Daytona Beach. Who was his victim? Michelle McGrath, a 22-year-old college student, whose infectious laugh and love for painting brightened the lives of those around her. Michelle had no personal connection to Godinez, a stranger whose path crossed hers in a moment of horror. But what drove him to destroy her life? In May 1994, Godinez, then 20, was a drifter, with a history of petty crimes and a growing obsession with violence. Court records show he had been drinking heavily at a bar near Daytona Beach, watching women come and go. Michelle, who had stopped by the bar to meet friends, caught his eye. As she left to walk to her car, Godinez followed, his intentions. The crime was horrific, a violation of trust and safety. In a nearby alley, Godinez attacked Michelle, raping her before strangling her with her own scarf. Her body was found hours later, hidden behind a dumpster, her purse and keys scattered nearby. The crime scene spoke of a desperate struggle, Michelle's life stolen in a moment of brutality. The investigation was meticulous. Police found Godinez's fingerprints on Michelle's purse, and DNA under her fingernails, evidence of her fight to survive. Surveillance footage from the bar showed him leaving minutes after Michelle, and a bartender recalled his aggressive demeanor. Godinez was arrested 3 days later, hiding in a motel. He confessed to the rape, but claimed the murder was an accident, a story that unraveled under scrutiny. The evidence was overwhelming. DNA, fingerprints, and witness accounts left no doubt of his guilt. The trial in 1995 gripped Florida. Prosecutors painted Godinez as a predator, citing his history of stalking women. The defense argued his intoxication impaired his judgment, but the jury convicted him of rape and first-degree murder, sentencing him to death. Appeals spanned 3 decades, with claims of ineffective counsel and questions about the DNA evidence, but all were rejected. A final appeal in June 2025 was denied by the Florida Supreme Court, sealing his fate. On June 24, 2025, at 6 p.m., the execution process began at Florida State Prison. Lethal injection was administered, a 3-drug protocol, a sedative, a paralytic, and potassium chloride to stop the heart. Godinez's last meal was simple, fried shrimp, and a slice of key lime pie, a nod to his Florida roots. In his final moments, he faced the witnesses and said, "I regret what happened. I hope her family can move on." At 6:10 p.m., the drugs took effect. Witnesses noted his breathing slowing, his face calm as death took hold. Thomas Lee Godinez was pronounced dead, a life ended for a life taken. Lastly, in the quiet town of Okaloosa County, Florida, a home that once echoed with laughter became a scene of unimaginable horror. Edward J. Zekrowski, executed on July 31, 2025, at the age of 56, was a man whose name now carries the weight of betrayal. But what did he do to end up on death row? His victims were his own family: Sylvia Zekrowski, 34, a devoted nurse and mother; Edward Zekrowski Jr., 7, a soccer-loving boy; and Anna Zekrowski, 5, a dreamer who loved ballet. They were the heart of his world, until his rage tore them apart. How does a man turn against those he vowed to protect? In June 1994, Zekrowski, then 25, was an Air Force veteran struggling with the collapse of his marriage. Court records paint a picture of a man consumed by control, unable to accept Sylvia's decision to file for divorce. Sylvia, known for her kindness at the local hospital, had confided in friends about Zekrowski's temper and controlling nature. She wanted a new life for herself and her children, but Zekrowski saw it as a betrayal. For weeks he stewed in anger, his obsession growing. On the night of June 10, 1994, while the children slept and Sylvia prepared for bed, Zekrowski made a fateful choice. Armed with a machete from his garage, he entered their home, his heart set on destruction. The crime was devastating, a slaughter that shook the community. Sylvia was found in her bedroom, struck multiple times with the machete, her body curled as if shielding herself from the blows. Edward Jr. and Anna were found in their rooms, their small bodies bearing the marks of a brutal attack. The crime scene was a nightmare. Blood stained the walls. A child's soccer ball lay near Edward's body, and Anna's ballet shoes sat untouched by her bed. A neighbor, awakened by a scream, called 911, but it was too late. The Zekrowski family was gone, their lives stolen by the man meant to protect them. But the evidence told a different story, one that would lead to justice. The investigation was swift and damning. Zekrowski fled, but turned himself in 3 days later, after his case aired on Unsolved Mysteries. Blood on his clothes matched Sylvia's DNA, and the machete, found in his car, bore traces of all 3 victims. During questioning, he confessed, claiming he lost control in a fit of rage, but showed little remorse. The evidence was overwhelming: the murder weapon, DNA, and his own words left no doubt of his guilt. He was arrested on June 13, 1994, at a police station, his face blank as he faced the consequences. The trial in 1995 was a media frenzy. Prosecutors called it a slaughter, emphasizing Zekrowski's military training as proof of his deliberate intent. The defense argued he suffered from PTSD from his Air Force service, claiming a momentary breakdown, but the jury didn't believe his story. He was convicted on 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Appeals spanned 30 years, with claims of mental illness and ineffective counsel, but the U.S. Supreme Court rejected a final appeal on July 3. No last-minute stays were granted. On July 31, 2025, at 6:30 p.m., the execution process began at Florida State Prison. Lethal injection was the method: a 3-drug protocol, a sedative to render him unconscious, a paralytic to stop his breathing, and potassium chloride to halt his heart. Zekrowski's last meal: a shocking request: steak, lobster, and a slice of chocolate cake, a lavish choice that sparked debate among onlookers. Strapped to a gurney, he faced a small group of witnesses, including Sylvia's sister. In his final statement, he spoke softly: "I failed them. I'm sorry." At 6:12 p.m., the drugs took effect. Witnesses noted a single tear rolling down his cheek as his breathing stopped, his body still in the sterile room. Edward J. Zekrowski was pronounced dead,